Nothing. A win for Raila does not guarantee anything for the country. It's not because they believe in the candidature of Raila Odinga. There are other machinations in the background. The only person who has demonstrable experience across the continent is Mahmoud, the candidate from Djibouti. Nothing. A win for Raila does not guarantee anything for the country politically. But when you talk about local politics, and we have already seen this in the last couple of months, if Raila Odinga wins the AUC, then it means that Ruto's support for Raila Odinga has borne fruit. And therefore, anything Raila Odinga cannot be seen to oppose the government of William Ruto. That is the only thing that may be an addition, not to Kenya, but to William Ruto and the Kenya Kwanza government. In terms of what the continent may benefit Kenya politically, there is really not much, because the AUC position is a secretariat position. The secretariat is in charge of implementing policy, and the policy, is championed through the heads of state. So politically, it may only be a localized effect with regard to Kenya Kwanza, and not so much the continent to the country. Raila Odinga only in the criteria you have mentioned, vision, experience, and influence. I think he may only excel at influence. And influence because he has experience managing local politics. He knows what carries sway with a politician or a head of state. In terms of experience and vision, if we were to award between 0 to 100, then I think he would score maybe 20 on both vision and experience. We are talking about experience, not just local political experience. We are talking about experience on the continent. And the only person who has demonstrable experience across the continent is Mahmoud, the candidate from Djibouti. He also has the vision. I think going by the debate that we had last time, the only candidate who espoused a vision for the continent, and I'm not just talking about these rhetorics that you could apply anywhere across the continent. I will build roads. You can apply that in Kivu. You can apply that in Blantyre in Malawi. You can apply that in Tot in Elgeyo Marakwet. But the only person who has a vision that is applicable for the continent and not just political rhetoric is Mahmoud. That question can be answered in two ways. Number one, in this sense that the actions of President Ruto as the EAC chairperson have a bearing on how the Francophone countries especially respond to Kenya. And because Kenya has Raila Odinga as candidate for AUC. We saw President Ruto make in his first calls a call to the President of France, Macron. And it appeared as though he was, very excited that he had made that first call. But most Francophone countries are looking increasingly away from France. You look at the Sahel, for example, because, they will be voting. The heads of state in the Sahel will be voting. There are about 4 heads of state. Those are 4 votes. If Kenya loses 4 votes from the Sahel just because President Ruto has shown a favoritism to France, then that may cost Raila Odinga votes on that front. The votes may only be interfered with in the Francophone countries, and I am almost certain that the Sahel may vote a different direction given what actions we have seen from President Ruto. Aside from that, we are not likely to see a big change in the votes of the AUC. The language factor seeps through into the political. So you have Anglophone countries pulling a certain direction because they get their funding from the West. You have Francophone countries pulling a certain direction because their funding comes from a particular direction. The language question may not be very significant because the politics of the continent are more about interest and resources. So if, for example, you have, let me give you an example of Djibouti. Djibouti leans west. They have a lot of funding from the United States. So in as much as their candidate is francophone leaning, they may lean anglophone in terms of voting. So the language question may only apply when you're looking at the Arabic countries. So when you're looking at the Sahel upwards, you may see the change in dynamics, not so much the West, because the Francophone countries are mostly segmented in the West. If it was an Anglo-Arabic question, then the dynamics would be very much different. But as it stands, we can only say that the only thing that will interfere with the Francophone vote is where Kenya is leaning vis-a-vis France. If he will be alive, yes. If time is not on his side, then of course he won't. But again, even if he's around up to 2027, I mean, there's a question of strength, mental capacity. We may see a scenario like the one we saw in the United States where, I mean, Biden had to step down, and where it is clear that an individual cannot really sustain a political campaign. So if he loses, if it is in him to vie physically, then he will vie. That is for a fact. If it is not in him, then he will back somebody else. But it might be as against William Ruto. That is for a fact, that if he loses AUC, then he will go against William Ruto in 2027. Africa is a pawn in the geopolitical space. And I'm saying a pawn because you have Western power interests, you have the East that are almost always using Africa for their own gains and benefit. So when you see a country, for example, endorsing the candidature of Raila Odinga, it is not because they believe in the candidature of Raila Odinga. There are other machinations in the background. France, for example, has put its weight behind Raila Odinga for obvious reasons. The West has put its weight behind Raila Odinga for obvious reasons, because most of the Western powers would rather see a weakened African Union. They would actually rather see an African Union that does not exist. So the endorsements have a backing. These presidents, there are very few presidents who are independent in thought and in mind. Most of these individuals have actually, been coerced. They have been cajoled into those endorsements by certain actors that are outside the continent of Africa. Karibu sana.
Asante sana.